Question 10 comes from Ben and Emily. So Ben has asked, how can I grow tomatoes to eat without a greenhouse? So you often see tomatoes being grown in greenhouses, and that tends to be so you can get an earlier crop, or a crop over a longer period. And they do grow really, really well in greenhouses. They do love that hot temperature. But they do grow well outside, and the secret to it is to grow a variety that's designed to be grown outside. So if you go in the springtime and have a look at all the different seed packets, there'll be some that'll say either perfect for outdoors or happy inside or outside or under glass or not, and you can get those ones. You start them off, you might need to start them off in a pot somewhere inside either in a greenhouse or on your windowsill, and then once it gets growing it's hardy enough so you let it have a little bit of time outside and inside. You can then plant it outside or put it in a pot outside. And lots of people grow them in hanging baskets so the fruit sort of grows down over the side, and that can be lovely. And then they should, if you get a decent summer, give you quite a decent crop of tomatoes. And again, it's all about being in the full sun. They love being in the sun and being watered quite well. So it's all about the variety that you pick with that one. So I hope that answers your question. And then you've also asked, what different types of oak tree can you get in the world? And it's a great question. I did a little bit of research on this one, and we think of the English oak as our sort of national tree, but there are apparently about 600 different types of oak trees in the world. And there are some oak trees that are sort of, or things that are called oaks, which aren't actually oaks, so there's a lot of different ones. And apparently they grow all over the world, and there's lots in China and America and places like that, South America. And apparently I think America has the most species. And there's all sorts of, I looked up a little list of different types. There was obviously about 600 of them. So but these are just some American ones that I happened to find. So there's black oak, California black oak, cherry bark oak, laurel oak, swamp Spanish oak, scarlet oak, Shumard oak, and southern red oak. There's so many. So lots is the answer. More than 600 different ones. So you could have a big forest full of 600 trees, and each one would be a different type of oak, because that would be a very interesting thing to do. So I hope that answers your question. And then Emily has asked, how does your gardening go? And I checked with your daddy, and what you mean is, what does my job involve? And I think some people would suggest that my job involves sitting in my van drinking lots of tea and coffee, but our job changes day to day, and we do lots of cutting people's grass and trimming their plants in their garden, but also advising people what plants to grow. So most days we'd sort of start at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we go and spend about an hour at each garden, and we cut the grass, make sure the edges look nice and neat, and then we maybe cut their hedges if they need it, might water the plants for them, and things like that. So, and it really does depend on the person's garden and what they want. But obviously each day brings new challenges, and a day like today when it's pouring with rain and a bit windy, we can't really do too much. If it's pouring with rain, it's a bit damaging to the plants, the grass particularly, to walk on it when it's really wet, and it's not great for the machinery as well, so we tend to go and find other things to do when it's raining. But I hope that answers your question. Alright, thank you very much. Question 11 comes from Will and Luke, and they've asked, why use weed killer when you can pull the roots up? Which method do you think is best? And it's a good question. The answer is that the best method is pulling them up by the roots, and it's to make sure that you get all of the roots up. So a plant like sting nettle, for instance, if you leave a little bit of the root in, it will regrow from that little bit of root. So you probably only need to leave in a couple of centimetres of root, and that will regrow from there. So as long as you get it all out, it's best to pull them out by hand. And you can do it carefully, and you can not disturb or damage any other plants. There are some weeds that using a weed killer is advised. There are certain invasive plants in this country, like Japanese knotweed and a few others, that using a weed killer on, if you're a professional, is probably the better answer in a way, because you can control it without disturbing the roots and in danger of spreading the roots. But most weeds that you're ever going to come across in your garden, it's best to pull them up by hand. So I hope that answers your question. You then asked, we've always got dandelions in the grass, how should mum get rid of them? So I would probably counter that by saying that you can be helping her get rid of them, not just your mum. But if you don't want them in there, they are green, they're not causing much problems, and they probably look quite like grass from a distance, and they're quite tough. But if you do want to get rid of them, you can lift up the sort of skirt of leaves, so pull up the leaves, and then if you get a trowel or a hand fork and push it right down so they have a long root like a carrot or a parsnip. And again, you want to try and get all of that root out if you can. And if you wait for a day when it's just had a bit of rain, but not loads, they'll often come up more easily than a dry day. And just lift those up, and you'll find that you probably won't get quite all the root out, and you'll leave a little tiny bit. But what's really important is when you do take them out, is to just disturb the soil a little bit, where you've taken them out, there'll be a little ring of bare soil, and to put some grass seed down or a new little bit of turf, because otherwise the dandelion might regrow, but other weed seeds might land there and grow, so you best to sort of get the grass growing in that little spot. So I hope that answers that question. And then you also asked, we've got a small cactus in a pot which has got baby cactuses. Can it be separated, and how do we repot it? And the answer is yes, you can separate it, and it's great. It's obviously very happy, you're doing something right with it. It's content and it's sort of bulking up. So the trick is, obviously, I'm assuming that the cacti has spines on it, so you do need to be careful. And a good trick is to get some newspaper or a toilet roll, and to use that to sort of wrap around the spikes, and then you can sort of try and carefully handle it with some gloves on. Lift it out of the pot carefully. You might need to knock off some of the soil around it, and then the little cactuses, the little cacti, will probably come off fairly easily. You might just need to use a pair of gloves, thick gloves, and just sort of break them off, or they'll come off easily, they'll separate off easily. And then it seems strange, but leave them for a little bit, and if they don't have roots, if they've got roots on them, you can stick them straight into some new gritty compost, so the compost like the stuff that the original plant was in. If they don't have any roots, leave them somewhere sort of dry and airy, and it doesn't matter if it's in sunlight, and it forms like a little callus like we get on our hands, and that just protects the wound. And then you can again stick that into some gritty compost, and from that callus then some new roots will grow. So, and just give it some water but not tons, don't overwater them, and they should get some new cacti from that. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Question 12 comes from Ewan and Dylan. So Ewan has asked, we love caterpillars, but they are eating our cabbages, and they've tried putting netting over and it's still eating them. And you said that you're picking them off and moving them over to Dad's nasturtiums, which seems a little bit unfair, but anyway. And are there organic options so Mum doesn't have to kill anything? And you're basically doing the best thing for it, is just going and picking them off. I think the trick would probably be to net them earlier, to put the cover over them earlier, so the caterpillars they've probably already been laid by the time you put the netting over, and it is really tricky to get it right. And the other thing might be to put some finer netting, so the butterflies can't get through to lay the eggs. So I hope that answers the question. It might be also be worth looking at the soil. If you're growing it in the same place over and over and over again, if you're growing cabbages every year, just have a look that the soil isn't leaving anything over winter, not necessarily caterpillars but just other things as well. So I hope that answers your question. Possibly don't just put them all on your dad's nasturtiums, maybe put them in other places as well, but it is tricky. It's always difficult to want to have wildlife in your garden but also have the things that you want to grow. Dylan's asked, how do we know when pumpkins and squashes are ripe? So you can tell they're both ripe when the stems, so not the actual pumpkin or squash itself, but the stems going up to it, they start to sort of wither and break up and split open. And particularly with pumpkins, it's also to do with, you need to check the sort of variety that you're growing and look at the colour that it's meant to be. So a sort of traditional Halloween pumpkin is that bright orange colour. So when it gets to be about that colour, it's ripe, if that makes sense. So if you're growing one that's maybe got sort of stripes down it or is green or something like that, you need to wait until it's that colour and the stems have started to break apart. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Final question, question 13. comes from Matthew and Alex, my two children. So Alex has asked, what is the tallest tree in the world? So we answered in one of the other questions, it's the giant sequoia trees, and they can grow to be absolutely ginormous. I can't quite remember how tall they were now, but they were huge, weren't they? 270 feet?
Yeah.
Something like that, wasn't it? Huge, absolutely massive. They grow in the Americas, but you can also grow them here as well. And if you ever do see them up close, they are absolutely breathtaking. It's like being inside a cathedral and looking up. They are huge. So, and then he's also asked, what is the juiciest apple in the world? Now this is an interesting question because I think it's a bit subjective. So I think it depends what you like. So I like a really crisp, juicy apple that I think some people might think was a little bit underripe, but that's how I like them. And where I used to work, we used to have an orchard with lots and lots of fruit trees in it. And I would go out very early in the morning when I just arrived at work, so just before 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd go and pick a fresh apple off the tree and bite into it. It'd be quite cold, but lovely and juicy and fresh. So that would be the kind of ones that I like. But most people think of the apple variety called Pink Lady as being the sort of sweetest and juiciest. But as always, it is personal choice, so it depends what you like. So I would suggest you go and try lots of different types, and you can work out which one you like the best. So I hope that answers your question. And then Matthew has asked, what is thicker, elder or holly bark? So I've left this one till the end because I don't really know is the answer to that. So typical that my own son has stumped me on a question. Tree bark is different thicknesses. So some tree bark can be very thick, and others can just be very, very thin, almost just sort of thickness of your nail. So I'm going to guess that elder bark is slightly thicker. I think holly tree bark is quite thin, and I think elder is just a bit thicker, but I don't think it's much thicker. So that's my best educated guess. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Okay, thank you for sending in all those questions. I've really enjoyed answering them. I tried to answer them to the best of my ability, so I hope you've enjoyed the answers. Feel free to send in any pictures or follow-up questions of anything that I've answered. If you want a little bit more information, I can try my best to help with that. So we'll go back to doing just standard gardening questions another time for question and answer. Maybe do an autumn version. So if you have any burning questions, you can get your thinking caps on for that. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. As always, I've been ably assisted by my two children, Matthew and Alex, so they're going to come on and bow. They've both been doing the videoing and the audio recording, so it's very useful, and my wife Vicky has been helping today as well with her broken arm, so she's been giving us help and tips from without actually having to hold anything up this time. So thank you very much everybody, and thank you again for sending in all your questions. See you soon.